Good morning, everyone. Namaste. Welcome. Some familiar faces and some people I haven't met before. So let's sit quietly for 5 minutes or so. Allow anyone else who may be joining to come on, and, and then we'll begin. Okay. So don't necessarily go back into your usual meditation technique, but just sit and simply be open to what is. Okay, just sit and open to the moment. Okay, well, good. We have a nice, cozy sized group, and we'll have plenty of opportunity for dialogue as well. So, so anyway, any topic we choose is just an excuse to come together and share in the silence and come back to our true nature, huh? Our inherent wakefulness, and they're all just pointers. Uh, but I felt that this particular topic might have some interest because we do indeed live in challenging, difficult times. I know for those of us in the United States, there's been a lot of concern about the political situation, as well as in Europe. Um, Things going in a direction that some of us may be concerned about. Um, and when we talk about politics, my politics are truth and love, right? Wisdom and compassion. Whoever represents those qualities the most is where my affinity goes. There's no ideology behind it, just the movement of the heart. So I think we've seen things move away from compassion toward exclusion and discrimination and hatred and violence. And so I think many of us have felt concerned about that. But just more broadly, uh, we're always living in challenging times, right? It's always challenging. For the ego, it's always challenging, right? Because the ego, the mind that centers on this small me and thinks that I am the center of the universe, nothing is ever going quite according to the way I would like it to be, right? I'm either not getting enough of what I want or I'm getting too much of what I don't want, right? So, from the ego's point of view, times are always challenging. Right? But, times get particularly challenging, uh, when we're faced, as I mentioned in the description, with illness, with loss, with uncertainty, um, and as we go through life, there are certainly times like that, particularly as we get older. How do we face those challenges in a way that we don't lose our ground? Huh? Um, we may find that sitting quietly on our meditation chair or cushion, right, in whatever way we do, may give us a sense of peace, equanimity, grounding in a deeper truth, maybe even a sense of awakened awareness, truth of our being. But when we get caught up in life again, we find that we lose our ground, we lose our connection with being, with truth. And I think this is a universal experience, right? Unless the awakening that you've had has been thoroughgoing and has obliterated all illusion, you're going to get caught up again from time to time. So, how do we maintain our ground? How do we come back when we lose our ground? And first of all, to begin with, oops, jet going overhead here. And first of all, what is our ground? What is the truth of our being, right? Because I think the most important thing in this regard is, first of all, to know the truth. You can't talk about losing your ground until you have ground to lose, right? And I would call it the groundless ground, in the sense that there's nothing solid there. But until we discover ourselves as consciousness, as emptiness, as love and compassion, and as the the true nature that we know ourselves to be. As until we see that clearly, uh, we can't really talk about um, losing our ground or not losing our ground, or how do we maintain our ground, or how do we come back to truth. So the first step is always to find out who we are, right? To wake up. Uh, that's the most important thing. Everything arises from that realization. Right? So we'll talk a little bit about that. You see, from the point of view of the ego, everything is problematic. In the Buddhist tradition, this is called dukkha, right? Suffering or dissatisfaction. Nothing is ever right. Nothing is ever good enough. So there's constant suffering. The ego is constantly suffering, constantly dissatisfied. Right? From the perspective of awakened awareness, the truth of our being, which is, I might add, always looking out through these eyes, even though we don't know it, that which is gazing out through these eyes is awakened awareness. We just don't realize it. Of course, and that realization, of course, is crucial, but to know that it's always the case. From that perspective, there are problems, but there's nothing that's problematic, right? In fact, everything is experienced. In the Tibetan tradition, they talk about one taste, ups, downs, backs and forths, gain and loss, success and failure are all experienced as the play of consciousness, as the play of Buddha nature, as the expression of who we are, right? So, how do we discover this awakened perspective? I think this is the number one key factor in living from truth in challenging times. The name of this little dialogue we're having, this little gathering we're having. First, what is truth? Right? Who are we really? Okay. So, how do we discover who we really are? Now, in my teaching, in my retreats, in the school, in my classes, I always come back to what I say quite simply is resting and inquiring. Huh? We learn to rest as awareness, and we'll do a little bit of that in our meditation today. Resting as awareness. Those of you who are in the school are familiar with this already, and some of you already maybe as well. But so we learn how to recognize our ourselves as awareness and to rest as that. And then once we've learned to rest, and in a certain way, you can't rest as awareness because awareness is what you are. It's not something you can do. It's more something you can fall into. And we'll talk about that. Just like you fall asleep, you can fall awake, you can fall into awareness. Um, and you actually can do a particular approach to meditation which allows you to recognize awareness and then to fall back into it. Ultimately, falling back into it is not something you can do, but it's something you can make available to yourself in a sense. And then once having recognized, then inquiry. Okay, and then inquiry can also lead to recognition, right? Who am I? Who is experiencing this moment right now? What is truth? I mean, different questions that point our awareness back upon itself. And we go into the great length in all of this in the School for Awakening, which we're in the middle of right now, annual event that I offer. But we'll do a little bit of the resting, right? So once we know who we are, then we can learn to meet the challenges uh, with equanimity, right? We realize when we wake up, we realize that we're not the content of our lives, we're the contents, right? We're the space, the openness in which all the problems, the challenges are arising, but we are not caught by what's arising. Huh? This is the nature of realization, right? Um, most of the time, of course, we're embroiled in the story, right? We're caught up in the drama. Right? In Buddhism, this is called samsara. In many traditions, this is called the dream, right? We're caught in the dream, and we take the dream to be real. Right? So dealing with challenging times really requires that we understand the difference between the dream and reality, right? That we see the drama, the story, as something that the mind is creating, and reality as being very simple and direct and straightforward, and something we can meet as it arises, right? So discovering who we are, then which is free of the story, right? See, most of the time we take ourselves to be our narrative, right? And this can be gross or subtle. It can be very subtle, you know? We can feel really alive and awake, and still there's this underlying monologue, this underlying story or narrative, which is constantly coloring our experience of reality. It's the filter through which we experience everything in terms of the me, this construct that I take myself to be. One of my teachers of psychology said, it's the self and world construct system. And that's precisely what it is. We've been talking about that in the school. We construct a self through our conditioning, through our childhood and adult experiences that we take to be real in certain ways, that we take to have certain qualities. And then we construct a world in relation to that, an outside world, others who we take to be real out there, who are supposedly in relationship to me, right? And then they have meaning for me, and we interpret them in certain ways. And this is our world, the world in which we live, right? And we take that to be real, yeah? So awakening is awakening out of not only the separate self, but the so-called external reality that we've constructed, right? And then we awaken into openness, potential, possibility, the unknown, the mystery, right? Which we're constantly rediscovering, right? So first of all, the first step in all of this is to recognize that we have constructed a world that we take to be real. I've been reading a very interesting book that someone, one of my students or clients, turned me on to, called Biocentrism by a guy named Robert Lanza, who is a scientist, very well-regarded scientist, who says, you know, the whole idea that there is a physical external reality that gave rise to consciousness is a mistake, you know? And he's coming from a scientific point of view. He said the whole quantum mechanics, physical, you know, physics is all mistaken. It's totally hypothetical, cannot be proven. What is really very experiential and knowable is that the reality supposedly out there is the creation of consciousness, and that life, that consciousness precedes physical reality. it was wonderful to read a scientist saying this. Seems like science is catching up with the great sages, right? So this world out there, which we take to be real, of course, it has relative reality. And, we get up every day and we brush these teeth and not someone else's. And we go to our job and not someone else's. And of course, we live in that relative reality. But the way that we interpret it, the way that we color it, right? And the way that we take it to be about me, and the way that we see other people through this lens and see situations through a lens, that is the creation of mind, the creation of ego, right? So awakening is seeing through that, waking up out of that, right? And of course, ego, the ego mind, the self-construct, the me, the little me that kind of exists inside of us, right? It takes every situation to be, an emergency, it's really, really important, Yeah, awakening is great, but this situation is really, we can't be awakened here. We've really got to use our mind here. We've really got to work this one out. We really got to figure this one out, right? That's why challenging times, what are really challenging times? To the ego, every situation is challenging, right? To awakened awareness, there's just one taste, and the experience is one of equanimity, one of love, right? One of deep, deep welcoming of what is. Not that we don't take action, of course, to make a situation better if it feels appropriate and helpful. But at the same time, we're not attached to the outcome. Yeah. So again, ultimately, the way to deal with challenging situations is to realize that they're not what we take them to be. Right? When I teach, one of the fundamental principles that I teach is a principle that runs through the world's great spiritual traditions, Christian, Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist, is renunciation. Now, usually we think of renunciation as, we're going to cut our hair or grow our hair down to our ankles and leave the world and go off into an ashram or a monastery or wander around like a sadhu, right? But the renunciation I'm talking about is much more fundamental. And it's the renunciation of the belief that anything out there is ever going to bring us happiness and contentment and peace, right? It's not out there. And in the dream, we still believe at some level, no matter how much spiritual literature we've read and how many satsangs we've listened to, that somehow, if I find the right partner, the right job, the right body, the right foods, whatever it is, I'm going to find happiness, That's the ego's deeply held belief, right? So renunciation, which I think in some ways really required on this journey of awakening, is that we really recognize that it's not going to happen out there. That awakening is the deepest source, Consciousness, our true nature, is the deepest source of satisfaction, of fulfillment, of happiness, huh? So to come to this with that attitude allows us to give up that constant hunger for something out there that will assuage that deep thirst for satisfaction, for fulfillment, for peace, for happiness. It ain't gonna happen out there, right? It's only going to happen in here, in the Buddhist tradition, and I think also in the Advaita tradition. The truth of our nature is called the ultimate medicine, right? But I think there's a a book by Nisargadatta called that, right? The Ultimate Medicine. Yeah, I think so. It's or in Buddhism, it's called the wish-fulfilling jewel. It's that which fulfills all of our wishes. All of our needs are taken care of by awakening to our true nature. So to recognize it's not going to be out there. From the ego's perspective, it's all challenging. Okay, it's not going to be satisfactory. Okay. So actually, I think what I'll do is pause at this time and see if there are any questions. Okay, we have a small enough group that I could see you, or and if you want to ask questions at this point, and then we'll do have a few questions, and then we'll do a meditation. So the way to ask a question would be to raise your hand. The main thing here is I want to make sure that we're kind of on the same page. I look at some of you, I don't know you, so I'm always interested in where you're coming from and what questions you have. So let's just take a pause here and open it up for questions. Are we sort of on the same page? You're in the right place, right? So, yeah. If you're on the phone, you could just, I don't know how you unmute yourself on the phone though. So, not sure how you ask a question on the phone, but small delay with video. Sorry about that. Yeah, that sometimes happens. As long as you can see me and hear me, even if there's a little delay, I think we'll be okay. So yeah, Joseph, you have a question? Yeah.
I think when I think of the challenges, it's a lot of sense of helplessness.
Yes.
And I'm sure that's the ego, but on the other hand, it feels really real that I have no control in it. And it's just, everything's going to hell, it seems like. And
right.
really.
Yeah, that's a beautiful question, actually. From one perspective, we are helpless, in that sense. Or let's put it this way, we are not in control, right? In fact, all the great spiritual traditions would, teach that, and the Judeo-Christian, it's God is in control, and the other traditions that we're more coming from, it's that consciousness is unfolding in this unique and mysterious way that the ego, the small self, does not control. So in that sense, we're not in control. In fact, again, coming to science, some of the studies have shown that the decision, the impulse to take an action comes actually seconds, even as much as seconds before the decision occurs in the mind. So there's already, we're being lived, it's already happening. And then the mind comes in and says, oh, I'm moving now. I'm doing this now, right? So in that sense, we're not really in control. But the sense of helplessness, that felt sense of helplessness, generally comes from childhood conditioning, right? And adult conditioning. So we're not helpless in that way, because if we can recognize that I am the universe that's living through me, I am consciousness that's expressing itself through this body-mind, then there's not a sense of helplessness in that small sense of, oh my gosh, I'm helpless, it's scary, I think the way to let go of helplessness that is like that small self-helplessness, is to a deep sense of trust, right? A trust in the universe, a trust that, yes, I am not in control, but that which is in control is ultimately, how shall I say, benevolent, even benevolent is not accurate, because it isn't always benevolent for me, but is complete, is perfect. It's the way it's meant to be. How do I know that? Because it's happening. So there's a deep sense of trust in the unfolding. Yeah. So I think the helplessness, though, it's a great question, particularly in this sense of challenging times, because, let's say the election of Donald Trump, I think a lot of people felt helpless, right? The way things are going in this country or in Europe in some areas, of course, the immigration situation causing, changes in government toward a more exclusionary policy, a more fear and hatred-based. There's a sense of helplessness. How can I prevent that? Do I put my head in like an ostrich in a hole in the ground and avoid, looking at what's happening? I feel somehow moved to read the New York Times every day, and yet, how do I relate to that? How do we relate to that? Not by helplessness is not helpful, obviously, but it can certainly be a response to what's going on. I feel helpless. So how do we come to this deeper ground where I know that what is happening is a mystery beyond my understanding, but still, how shall I say, is inherently perfect. I shudder to use that word. We're not talking about perfect in terms of perfect and imperfect, but this is what comes with awakened awareness, the inherent sense of completeness and perfection, which then allays the sense of helplessness, One teacher said that, the sense of the fear of death is allayed when we awaken to our timeless spiritual nature, and the feeling of lack is allayed or assuaged when we realize that we are everything, right? So how can we feel lack when we realize that we are everything? How can we feel helpless when we realize that we are everything? Huh? It's the little me that feels helpless, right? As long as we're identified with a little me in here, surrounded by forces beyond our control, we're going to feel helpless. Of course, how could we not, But when we recognize that who I really am is nothing and everything, right? Then the sense of helplessness falls away. So that's a great question, Joseph. Thank you. I think many of us feel that. Yeah. Yes, Anne, hi there.
Hello. I think you've spoken before about spiritual bypassing and written about it. And I would love for you to take us a little closer to that from where you've taken us so far, because it's almost like I think you've also drawn the line distinction between awareness and being the witness. And for me, being the witness, as I understand it, is really disengaging and watching, and that's spiritual bypassing. But it's almost like walking that razor's edge. If we're being lived and trying to give to that, where do I just continue to be aware and wait for I hate to say the puppet, but for the expression, the experience of the divine to happen? Or where, is there volition? Is there not volition? Am I a witness? Am I a witness with volition? I'm almost paralyzed, not knowing what I should open myself to, or what.
Right. Well, what is your understanding from your own spiritual experience? I would ask you that.
Yeah, I tend to agree with what you've said so far, and I do believe in the divine play and awareness or God or ground of beings experiencing form, yes. And in that respect, we are sort of living out in this human state, and however we perceive it. I do believe and accept that it is largely an illusion, but not like we've made this terrible mistake and that that's the way it is.
What I say is it's important for you to really recognize the truth of these statements for yourself, through your direct experience, right? not just as a spiritual belief system.
Yeah.
You know, and it may be that you have, I don't necessarily suggest that you haven't, but that it really be true for you, right? That you know, that first of all, you know, recognizing yourself as awareness, as the awake, aware witness, is a step, can be a step in the awakening process. So if that's what your experience has been, that's great. You know, recognize yourself as awareness, which is not necessarily, you know, which feels somewhat separate from what it's aware of, right?
Yeah, there's a detachment there.
There can be a detachment, but that's okay.
All right.
To hang out there, to enjoy that, to find the peace and equanimity there. But then ultimately, you have to discover the non-separation between what's looking and what's being looked at, right? And that's something.
Yeah, that's what I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's what something you awaken to again. I mean, I can tell you that,
Yes.
but you know, it's something you have to have as your own experience. You know, and if certain, you know, certain pointers can be helpful in this regard. You know, and we'll, in fact, I'll do a meditation that when you and I are done, we can move into meditation, in which I invite you to experience that. So, yeah, but spiritual bypassing, yeah, I think that can be an issue, you know, but the first step is to recognize yourself as awareness, right? Which is not embroiled in the drama, right?
Okay.
And then I think that's usually a first step, and then to then open to the realization, which can happen in the very same moment or the next moment, open to the recognition that that which is looking and that which is being looked at are not separate. You know, they're the same essence. And this is where love comes in, you see, because awareness, you know, this is awareness can be very dry, you know, disengaged. When you look out and see, as Nisargadatta said, I am everything, there is love, right? There's that movement of love, right? So let's do this meditation, shall we? And then if you have questions about that, some more.
Okay.
Yeah, but it segues right into it. So just take a moment to be comfortable if you aren't already. We'll take maybe 15, 20 minutes on this. You can begin by just being aware of your breathing if you like. It's always, by the way, an excellent place to begin a meditation period, is to rest awareness on the breath. And it also cuts through this kind of detachment. So what I recommend in the beginning of a meditation is actually to shift out of thought, the thought factory in the neocortex, as Sean Klein used to call it, and into your direct sensate experience. And a great way to do that is to be aware of the breathing coming and going, huh? Not from a distance, but letting your awareness drop in, experiencing the breath from inside the breath, intimate. Awareness is not located in the head, remember. Awareness is all pervasive. And you can be aware of the full range of body sensations from inside, from the inside. Awareness is right there, inseparable from the experience. In fact, there is no experience without awareness, right? Awareness The objects of awareness are not separable. So right there, in that experience, you have the resolution of the dichotomy between subject and object. You're experiencing, you're aware of sensation from within sensation. There's no gap between awareness and the object of awareness. See, that is reality. So that is the nature of reality. So when you even just simply meditate in this way, there's the possibility of just right now experiencing that inseparability. In every experience, there is the inseparability of awareness and the object of awareness. In other words, what is? Because the only is for you, or for me, is that which I am experiencing. Beyond our experience, there is no other world, there is no other reality. Our reality is our experience. And experience is made up of awareness. This is what non-dual means. The inseparability of awareness and the objects of awareness. Now, at the same time, just continue with this meditation. You can ask yourself the question, am I aware? Right? So we're coming at it from a slightly different angle now. Am I aware? And as long as you can hear that question, right, and respond to that question, the answer is, I am aware, right? So or another way to say it is, there is awareness. Right? Now, awareness, from this perspective, awareness is free of the objects of awareness, just as, this is the paradox, awareness is both inseparable from and at the same time free of the objects of awareness. So this is an advanced course, folks, this meditation. You're getting it all. So just as space is not caught up in the objects of space, right? There is space and then there's what's arising in space, just as there's the sky and the plains and clouds and whatever else, birds arising in the sky. The sky is not fused with, embroiled in what it passes through the sky. The sky is open and all inclusive, and what passes through it does not disturb the sky. In the same way, awareness, ground of awareness, is undisturbed by what arises in awareness. So in this moment, just be aware of that which is aware, awareness itself, like the sky, like space, open, all-inclusive, non-locatable, timeless, and whatever arises is arising in this space of awareness, and you are that awareness. So rest as awareness, that which is aware, and allow whatever arises, thoughts, feelings, sensations, memories, to come and go in awareness. And yet, you, awareness, are undisturbed. I am awareness. The non-locatable, empty, all-pervasive, all-welcoming, consciousness, space in which everything is arising. And who I take myself to be, thoughts, feelings, stories, memories, images, are simply arising in what I actually am. And yet, when I open my eyes and gaze around, I see that everything is nothing but awareness. What I took to be solid, substantial, is actually the play of awareness. Its very essence is awareness. Indeed, there is nothing but awareness, nothing but consciousness. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. As one great Tibetan master said, gazing with sheer awareness, uncolored by thought, into sheer awareness. So gazing with sheer awareness into sheer awareness, that which is looking, that which is looked at, that which is hearing, that which is heard, that which is sensing, that which is sensed, are one and inseparable, nothing but consciousness. So gazing with sheer awareness into sheer awareness, habitual abstract structures melt into the fruitful springtime of awakening. So all the structures that we use to interpret reality, to create a self, fall away in this non-dual realization. So often the first stage is recognizing that you are awareness, separate from form, because otherwise we're completely caught up in form, right? Really caught up in the dream, the drama. Everything is very solid and real, endlessly challenging, etc., etc. It's challenging times. And yet, right? So we awaken as awareness, usually first, and then we come to recognize that awareness, the objects of awareness are equally empty, are all consciousness, are all essence, are all spirit, right? And that's the full realization. That's why it's called non-dual. Okay, so you can let go of the meditation for now, but of course allow this recognition, whatever you've been able to grok, recognize directly for yourself, to continue to affect you and influence your experience. So again, let's open it for questions, or sharing of your experience of that. Anne, how was that in response to your question?
I still feel like it's a place I go to and not a place that I am.
There you go. That's right. So that's the growing edge for you.
I guess, yeah. Intellectually, I get it, and I like it, and I'm drawn to it. But yeah, I guess there's some why questions, which are really pointless, that are wrapped up in that too. I guess
why questions? Yeah.
Why questions, as in, why is awareness creating this dream? It's almost like, why am I going through these steps? It's just like kicking up dust and cosmic dust, in somebody's mind. That kind of stuff, which will get you nowhere.
Yeah, it'll get you nowhere. Yeah, it's the mind's attempt to understand what can't be understood, really. I mean, why question? Food for the mind, right? I
like to tell myself it's above my pay grade. So
yeah, it's above your pay grade. It's above all our pay grades.
Intellectually, yes.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, who knows why? I mean, that's the eternal mystery, isn't it? Isn't it wonderful that it's a mystery?
Yeah, it's like we're in a movie, right? Are we in a movie? More or less.
Or a mystery, it's a mystery. We can't know it. It is what we are. The mystery is what we are. If we could grasp the mystery, it would die.
It wouldn't be a mystery.
It wouldn't be a mystery anymore. That's right. So we are living the mystery. The mystery is living us.
Yes.
And, as you say, I haven't quite realized that is what I am. That's your growing edge. That's beautiful. So just to keep coming back to that and, leaning into that and feeling into that until it really becomes clear that is what I am fundamentally. Yeah. not an experience I'm having, but who I am. Yeah. Okay, thank you, Anne. Yeah. Someone else? A number of people are joining. I wonder if there was a time confusion, but anyway, it's good to have you here. Anyone else have a question or something to share? How was that meditation for you? Feel free to, if you're not visible, to turn on your camera so we can see you if you want to ask a question. So this is the part where we shift into dialogue. So hopefully you've got some questions. Otherwise, we're going to sit here. I mean, I can always think of things to say, but yeah, quite a few people joined late. I did have it down as 9 a.m. Pacific time, so I'm not sure what happened, but anyway, someone else?
Well, I thought I might take a crack at it.
Yeah, Jim. Hi.
And yeah. I'm talking. I wanted to, I think, just share my experience with, especially what Anne was asking why. She was asking, why do we do what we do? But for me, it's not so much why as noticing that I'm doing it right now.
Uh-huh.
What I'm doing right now is I'm taking a walk through meaning.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. I'm taking a walk through meaning. Whoops. Sorry, can you unmute yourself again? I accidentally muted you. Yeah, thanks. Taking a walk through meaning. That's great.
Yeah, it's like every time I open my mouth and say something, I'm creating some meaning. And when I notice that I'm doing that, if I can really notice that I'm doing that, I have a tendency not to do it anymore, especially with my own thoughts, with my own sense of who I am.
Great.
Because
so you notice it, and in the noticing of it, it falls away.
Yes, that's right. Because you see through the fact that your thinking is empty. You see that you're creating your sense of self. You're creating the meaning in your life. You're creating all of the activity and all of the interpretations that you have. You create that yourself with your thinking, with your mind.
Absolutely. That's what we mean by that self-construct, isn't it?
Yes.
It's just the creation of thought. And
yes.
the more that we can see through it and see it as it is, we're not trying to get rid of it or
That's right.
with it or analyze it or psychotherapize it. We're simply seeing it for what it is. In the seeing of it, we're out of the process, right?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? In the seeing of it?
In the seeing of it, we are out of the process. You see,
yes,
that we are aware of it. In that moment, we are awareness. We're not in it.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, it's like you're able to step back and you see what is being created.
Yes. And then in that moment, then there can be this moment of turning awareness back upon itself and wondering, and what is aware of that, right?
Even that question, even turning awareness on itself, for me anyways, is just getting right back into the story again. It's almost as if
that's because you haven't learned how to ask the question, I would suggest.
Well, let me put it another way. The way I feel about it is that my mind is so completely free that returning to any kind of meaning at all is not necessary. So looking back on awareness, it just feels kind of like an empty thing to do. Why, who or what would need to do that, you know? It's like it's so completely without limit, without substance, that there's no need to get back involved in the substance of it.
Yeah, well, beautiful. Then you've already answered the question that you see that turning awareness back upon itself would ask. So in that knowing, then there is no need for a question.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. If you know that which is looking to be limitless and timeless and completely open and without qualities or limitations, then there's no need for a turning awareness back upon itself, of course.
That's right. Yeah, because you're already that. So you wouldn't need to turn anything back on itself.
Absolutely.
And when you were giving your meditation, which I liked it very much, you were suggesting that, we could consider ourselves to be awareness. But in the considering of yourself to be awareness, it's still the mind coming in and saying something, as opposed to just being it. Being it is before any saying of anything. Because
yes,
the saying comes after.
That is true. And yet these pointers are skillful means.
I'm not criticizing the pointers.
I didn't think you were criticizing anything, Din.
Yeah.
I was simply responding to what you said.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So what I'm saying is that those are pointers which don't have absolute truth in themselves, but if things are not clear, those pointers can help awaken us to that deeper dimension. That's all.
Yes, it can. And a paradox I find with the pointers is that if you follow the pointers, if you get involved with them, that you're actually still involved with meaning and creating meaning. So it's like the unconscious, unconsciously being stuck in meaning.
Could be.
As opposed to just being free with nothing to hold on to. You're just here, without having to get involved with anything at all.
That could be the case or not.
Yes. Yeah.
It sounds like that's true for you.
Yeah, it's true for me. Yeah. And I suppose why I'm bringing it up is to help people to see that they don't really need to get involved with their thinking if they can notice that their thinking is something that they're doing. They're bringing up their own thinking. They're identifying with it, actually. And when they do that, that's how they're creating their sense of self or their sense of who they are and what their life is about.
Yeah, that's a good pointer. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Good, thank you.
You're welcome.
Someone else want to ask or share?
Hi, it's Lori here. Sorry I came late. For some reason it was showing up as starting at 10 o'clock Pacific time, but so I'm not sure what I missed, but just in listening to the conversation that just happened, I'm just noticing my experiences often that I don't create my thoughts. I don't create my emotions. When I really start paying attention, I don't find that I can say that I'm creating my likes or dislikes or compulsions or needs, things I'm good at, not I'm good at, that I'm not good at. Like I can't, when I look closely at it, I can't trace it back to where it actually began. Like I can't find, I can't land on a fixed place. It just seems like this stuff just arises. And that maybe, I do identify with it. And at the end, it's like they say thought is the last thing that comes to the dinner table. Like there's this saying, well, that it's me doing it. But the more closely I look, it's like thoughts just seem to come up. Like they seem random. It's like, where did that come from? Like I can't feel like I'm creating, because if I did, I would only have happy thoughts. I'd only have good emotions. I'd be good at things I want to be good at that I can't seem to.
Well, it's wonderful. You can't locate the source of thoughts. Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we say, I think, I feel, you know, I'm generating these thoughts, but it looks like you can't find the I.
I can't. You know, I
How
can't
beautiful,
where it
beautiful.
started. So there is a feeling that it's just this
So,
just
so what does I refer to when you use this word in everyday life? What are you referring to?
it seems like I have this personal identification with it, but
All
yet
right.
when I try and not do something, I can't. Like so it's this it's kind of frustrating because I can see on the one hand I don't have control over anything, but there's still this compulsion to want to direct things or take off ownership or authorship or authority, but it's impossible. It's very frustrating, actually.
Well, frustrating to whom?
Well, there's frustration.
Okay. So that which is aware of all of that, that which is just noticing all of this happening, is not disturbed by it, right? Is not caught up in the process. Can you get a sense of that which is undisturbed, right? Which is aware of all that and doesn't know and can't figure it out, and yet it's just simply aware, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So to come back to that, rest there.
Mhm.
Okay. Like,
And that coming back to it, like, how does that happen? Because if there's not a me, is it just this cause and effect, this dynamic that happens? Like, I'm here, I listen to you, it's a pointer, it happens. Because,
well, see, from one point of view, there is no coming back to it because that's what you are, right?
right.
And I think that's what Din is pointing to, this deeper sense that, you know, nothing has to happen. Everything is just happening the way it does. And this awakened awareness is what you are, you see. That which is undisturbed is what you are. You don't have to make that happen. And yet, if you don't realize that for yourself, if you don't recognize that, it doesn't have any influence over your life, right? It's of no use to you, no benefit in your life, right? So what I would say is, in those moments when you are aware of all this, you know, the thoughts are coming and you don't know where they're coming from, and there's frustration about that, to ask yourself, what is aware, you know, and to just notice that there is a dimension of your experience which is undisturbed, right? It's aware of, but undisturbed, right? And if you actually were to go to try to find that, you couldn't locate that like you can locate a thought, or you can locate a, you know, a belief or something like that, right? Or frustration or whatever. And once you recognize that, you can just rest there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you may not know how to do that. And that's part of the paradox of it, you see. But there is that which is always aware. It's always present. And it's always undisturbed, right? We're just not aware of it. We're just not aware of awareness. So that being aware of awareness is the crucial step.
Thanks. And yeah, it seems like it needs to have this remembering to fall
That's
back.
right.
But I guess my last question, because I know there's other.
You don't have to pull back, because what you are is already disengaged, you see, already not caught up. Yeah.
I guess that's the thing, is because sometimes it sounds like there's a separation happening, but there can't be, right? Because it's all one movement.
That's right. It's an apparent separation, right?
Right.
Just an
Yeah.
apparent separation.
Yeah. Thank you. That's really helpful.
Beautiful, Lori. And maybe you can get to listen to the first part of
Great.
I'll do a recording and I'll post it somewhere on YouTube or something. So
I will. Thank you.
yeah, great. Thanks for joining. Sorry if there was any confusion with the time, but yeah.
That's what is.
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah. Great. Wonderful. Wonderful questions. Wonderful dialogue. Thank you so much, everyone. What someone else want to offer or ask? Please. I guess even if you've come late, you can still ask or contribute. It seems like we're all sort of on the same page here, on the same general, on the same journey, shall we say? Huh?
Hi.
Yeah. Who's that?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, Greg.
Yes, hi.
Hi, Greg. You just
Hi.
joined?
Yeah, sorry, I got the email. It said 10 a.m. Arizona time.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Yeah, just a couple of questions. One of them would be, I mean, I understand all this awareness of awareness, but I've got a young family, and for instance, I'm aware a lot of the time, but then I'll lose it, and then I'll be annoyed, and I'll be quite easily frustrated. I'm still aware of that, but I'm caught up in it. And I guess if you have any tips on family life, really, 'cause it's
Challenging
constant. Yeah,
times. Challenging times. That's the name of this dialogue today. Challenging times. Family is challenging. Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. How old are your kids?
2 and 8.
Okay. Well, you know, little ones have a capacity to bring us into the present, right?
Yeah,
Out of our concerns and our deliberations and our story, and really bring us into the intimacy of the moment, right? So I would say when you have young kids, not to see them as an obstacle, but to see them as your teachers, huh? Inviting you into the simplicity of right now, you know? So, join them in whatever they're involved in, and just be with them, in the simplest way, you know?
yeah. I mean, with the younger daughter, we go for walks in the park and that's really nice, calm experience. But with the
Yes.
older daughter, I find I have a lot of expectations, and whenever I expect certain behavior, because she's older, I expect more. So then I get triggered a lot, and I find myself triggered, and I hold myself back, and then I'm kind of aware. I can be angry or frustrated and still be aware of it. I'm also wondering, is that my ego that is aware, or is that awareness that is aware? Is there like
I'm not sure, but always awareness is aware, of course, of whatever's arising. But you might want to investigate your expectations about your daughter. This is in a very practical way, to really inquire into those expectations, because again, we talked earlier about how the ego is never satisfied. It's always dissatisfied with the way it is because it has an agenda. Life should be a certain way. It should look a certain way, right? And we're very invested in that. Maybe you have a vested interest in your daughter seeming a certain way, or maturing in a certain way, or developing in a certain way, or treating you in a certain way,
yeah,
And
exactly.
yeah, so to really inquire into whether those are really true,
Yeah, I mean, I
Right?
think,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt, but I think part of it is I'm kind of addicted to the peace and quiet. I mean, when I've got the house to myself for like half an hour, I've got real deep peace, and it's amazing in a way. But that doesn't last long because
Right.
the
Right.
kids come along and that, and yeah, I lose it. So I think I'm attached to that feeling of peace, um, and that feeling that I'm in control of my awareness. I mean, I,
That's right. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I do look at a lot of my triggers and awareness, and I even think, yeah, I'm probably projecting onto her, and even wanting her, because I'm no good at meditating, so I want her to be great at meditation and stuff like that. So I definitely get a lot of that. But yeah, I
That's
guess that's just part of the part of the thing. I did have
Yeah. So
another.
you're aware of your expectations.
Yeah,
And then of course, to take those wonderful opportunities when there's silence in your house, and, jump on those opportunities just to rest in being, and really enjoy that stillness. But when you're with your daughter, just to be with her and love her as she is, right? To
yeah, but
really,
she's got a great way of triggering me, which I just think I was probably the same as her.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
She's got a great way of triggering me.
That's right.
And
That's
I'm
right.
thinking I was probably the same as her, so it's probably my karma, you know.
That's right. That's right. She's probably like you when you were that age, right?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Uh,
So just to be with her, uh, and to welcome who she is, you know, to really like be, you know, when you're with her, as you know, as much as you can. Obviously, you know, there are certain structures, and she needs to do her homework or you know whatever. But then at other times, as much as you can, just to be with her and as she is, you know, and to love her, welcome her, and give her the space to be who she is with you, you know. That's the greatest gift we can give our kids, you know, is the freedom to be who they are, you know. I mean, kids come in with these wonderful gifts, you know, to share with us, you know, and yet we want them to be a certain way, and we want to keep shaping them, you know, but to give her really as much space as you can. And again, awareness, awakened awareness, who you are, doesn't have any problem with the way she is. You see, that's all ego. Yes, for sure. So to really just give her that space to welcome who she is, you know, that's what love is, really, you know, to welcome what is, you know. So, and in that space, she blossoms, you know. She knows that daddy loves her as she is, and that, you know, there's freedom to be who she is. That's what she needs ultimately, you know, for her to grow, you know. A little shaping here or there, you know, obviously, do your homework, you know, structure, kids need structure, but the underlying welcoming is so important, you know. Does that make sense?
yeah, yeah, that's great. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I did have another question if we got time.
Okay, sure.
Um, yeah, I wanted to know if there is like an awakening event type of thing. Like I read a quote the other day about Buddha when he had his awakening. He saw all his past lives and things like that. I mean, does that come about for at all, or?
Um, I've never actually read that. Maybe there are some traditions that say that.
There's
Um,
Tibetan Buddhism.
but seeing past lives is not necessary. You know, in terms of awakening, uh, usually there is a moment when there's a noticeable shift, right? A shift out of identifying as the personality, as the content, and a shift into identifying, not just being aware of, but identifying with, knowing yourself as awareness, awake awareness that is always present and is free of content, right? There is that shift into pure awareness. That moment can be very powerful. You know, it can be one of these aha, powerful awakening experiences, or it can just be something very simple and subtle, you know. But there is usually that moment. And then there may be subsequent moments where that deepens and ripens. And then there's, of course, the realization that not only am I just pure awareness, pure awareness is everything. There's no separation, right? That's the trajectory of awakening. Usually it's awakening to being pure awareness. And then, as I talked about earlier, then to recognize that this pure awareness that I am is the essence of everything, see? So that's what awakening is. It doesn't involve past lives. That's hearsay, you know? We actually don't know what happened to the Buddha. You know, nothing was written down until 500 years after he died. So, you know, do some people see past lives? Yeah, but it's not important, really, you know. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, a lot of times people expect awareness to be this big explosive experience, you know, in which they see past lives, they experience bliss and kundalini and, you know, explosive fireworks. And it isn't necessarily like that. It can be very subtle. So don't discount your awakening. If you have an awakening that isn't like that, it can just be, oh, I see. Aha, now I get it, you know.
Yeah, I think I'm aware of awareness, but I'm not identified with awareness all the time.
Right. Well, just keep coming back to awareness,
Mhm.
being aware of awareness and resting as awareness, resting as that which is open, uninvolved in what's going on, okay? Just keep coming back to that, like when you're with your daughter, what would it be like to just be awareness in that moment? Not be daddy with his expectations, but be awareness. Experiment with that. See, that's where she gives you this wonderful opportunity to, be awareness in the midst of life.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a wake-up call. If I can catch myself, catch the triggers, it actually wakes me up to become present. But it's like surfing big waves.
It's like surfing big waves, right. Yeah, family life is like surfing big waves. Yeah.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know, having raised a couple of kids, I know what it's like to be involved with family life, and yet we can stay awake in the midst of that. We get pulled away, of course, no problem. We get, swept away by a big wave, and yet then we come back to awareness. We come back to awake awareness. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you, Greg. Yeah. Someone else.
Could I add something to what Greg just said?
If you'd like, Din.
Okay. He was saying that he's not identified as awareness yet. He's just aware that he's aware.
That's what he said, yeah.
Yeah. And so what I notice is that, awareness is already aware, and I'm already that. So there's no need for me to identify with it. As a matter of fact, to identify with this or with that is just more egoic thinking. And I think when I notice that all of my thoughts are coming from this need to do something, from this sense of separation. So when I feel separate, I feel I need to do something. So all of my thoughts, I feel I need to do this or I need to do that. Well, once you notice that you're already this awareness, all of those thoughts get undermined, and they kind of lose their sense of being real, their sense of substantiality. And so the only thing that's left is, it's kind of like a not knowing, because you don't take anything that you think or feel as real anymore, because you already know that you're awareness. And awareness doesn't need to do anything. It simply is. It's beingness itself. So any sense of needing to do something is coming from that separate sense of self.
Yeah, that's true, Din, and that's one way to approach it.
Yeah.
And I certainly appreciate it.
Okay.
At the same time, there are certain things that we can do, and until we see that's coming from the recognition already that you are awareness. And once there's that recognition, then, as you say, there's nothing to do. One recognizes that one is awareness. There's no separation, and therefore, it's all complete. But until that point, there can be a certain amount of inquiry, a certain amount of resting that happens. And again, the approach you're talking about is one way to go about it, But
yes.
The way I go about it is somewhat different, in which there are things that we can do until we recognize that there's nothing to do. You see?
Understood. Yeah.
So, but what you say is accurate, of course. But this is what is called in the Zen tradition the gateless gate. You see, once you're on the other side of the gate, you realize there was never a gate, there was never a barrier. This is it.
Right.
But when you're on the other side of the gate,
it feels different.
Feels like there's a barrier.
Right.
And then, yeah. So how does one shift to the other side of the barrier, or as they say, the open secret? It's secret, but it's an open secret. But until you recognize the secret, it's not open. See. So what can one do? Well, these are things that one can do. But maybe they don't bear any fruit, and maybe they reinforce the sense of a separate doer. Perhaps it's possible. Yeah. at the same time, you know, what are you going to do? Right. Yeah. Thanks, Din. Appreciate
Okay.
it. Yeah. Okay. Let me see. I see there's a little, we'll run over a bit since people came late. And again, my apologies. It sounds like I did something, I gave a wrong time here. Dear. I have a hard time with time. Someone please help me. Can you talk about compulsions if you have a chance, Stephen? I experience them so strongly that I am powerless with the movement. I open to awareness and rest, but the charge just keeps coming back. Yeah, compulsions, yeah. Well, in the moment, obviously, there's nothing you can do. So let yourself be swept away. To use the metaphor of the wave that Greg introduced, you know, when there's a compulsion, I would say, you know, let yourself be taken by it. If you have no choice, obviously, you know, if you have a way to recognize it as a compulsion and in that moment choose a different way of being, then by all means. But in the moment, you know, a compulsion is a strong word. So I presume you're talking about like obsessive compulsive. You know, you feel you need to wash your hands or check the locks or do something or some addictive behavior. Obviously, if you have no choice, you have no control, let yourself be carried. And then once the compulsion has run its course, then stop and just be aware of what happened. The more that you can, in the moment, be aware of the signals, the signs that the compulsion is grabbing you and pulling you, and can again just simply rest as awareness. You know, again, one can say that once you know yourself to be awareness, which again, as I mentioned at the beginning, is the first step. See, there's not much you can, you know, everything else is just a technique until you recognize yourself as awareness. And then once you recognize yourself as awareness, then there's simply the coming home, the coming back to who you really are. And from that place, you know, the compulsion just seems like a lot of energy, a lot of strong energy that you're not drawn into, you see. It's because there's an identification with being a separate self, with thoughts, certain thoughts, that you get drawn into the compulsion. So again, it brings us back to being aware of ourselves, recognizing our natural state of awakened awareness. That's the first step, really. Until we realize who we are, then, you know, I can give you techniques, you know, in the moment, be aware of the strong energy, and as much as possible, be aware of it, but not caught by it, right? That's the first step that we talked about, being aware of your thoughts, your feelings, your stories, your compulsions, but not being identified with them. You know, becoming, first of all, allowing a spacious awareness in which everything can arise, but is not caught up in it, and then ultimately knowing ourselves as awareness. Until there is that spacious awareness, you're going to be caught up again and again in the compulsion, you see. So the call again and again is to this question of who am I? Who is experiencing this moment? What am I really? Right? So as I said earlier, for those of you who didn't come, if there are techniques, and again, techniques have their limitation, as Din has pointed out, any technique can reinforce the sense of a separate someone who's doing it, you know, and just simply take us away. And at the same time, techniques, I like to say that, you know, certain things we can do make us more accident prone, right? You know, we talk about being accident prone. We can be awakening prone, right? And what makes us awakening prone? Sitting quietly and being open to what is. And then occasionally inquiring into the I that we take ourselves to be. You know, I do this, I think this, I am this. You know, who is this I? Can we find it? Where is it located? What is it made of? Can we really find this I? Or is this I really just awareness itself, right? The inquiry and the resting allow us to step out of our usual compulsive behavior, whether it's actual compulsion or just our usual obsessive and compulsive, normal, everyday behavior, and to wonder who we really are. Huh? So compulsions are, in that sense, an opportunity. They're a pointer back to who you really are, an opportunity to wonder, who is it that's caught up? Who is it that's identified, right? Those are challenging times. Compulsions are definitely challenging, you know, as we talked about. Anyone else? Just one more question, then we'll kind of wrap up for today. And again, my apologies if I gave the wrong time in one of my emails, but yeah, let's see here. Okay, Joseph, yeah, one more question.
Yeah. I can relate to what Din says in a way. I mean, I think there's awareness. I mean, it's simplicity itself is awareness. And sometimes pointers can, well, it can reinforce, I suppose. On the other hand, the separate self. On the other hand, like the meditation, like I don't know what you said, something like timelessness during the meditation, or just being awareness or something. I'm not sure what it was, but it sent me into this space or whatever it was, true timelessness. And I don't think that reinforced a separate self for me. I think it, if anything, it, well, it's indescribable what it is, but it was beautiful is what it was. And
an invitation to taste your true nature. That's what these are, really. They're invitations. You know, Ramana Maharshi, you know, said he was the one who popularized the use of the who am I question, you know, Atma Vichara. And he said, you know, the question is like a stick that's used to stir a fire, and eventually the stick gets burned up in the fire, right? So these techniques, these questions, these meditations are just invitations to taste our true nature. And eventually these techniques just they dissolve into being itself, right? If we hold, you know, and in Buddhism they say it's like carrying, it's like taking a raft to the other shore of who we are, and then carrying the raft around on our head. You reach the other shore, you leave the raft behind. So these questions, these meditations are just rafts that take us to our true nature, and then we leave them behind. They dissolve in the journey, they dissolve in the inquiry. So use them as feels appropriate, but don't take them to be real in themselves. They're just pointers. Okay. So thank you, Joseph. Yeah, I think this is a good place to end. So thank you, folks. Those of you who came late because I had given the wrong time, this will be available on YouTube. I'll post it on YouTube, and hopefully you'll have a chance to see the rest of it. So thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciated all your sharing and your questions and your comments. Namaste, and hopefully we'll have a chance to be together again before too long. Take care.